Hello YouTube. A few days ago I asked you which script I should finish first, and the overwhelming majority voted in the poll on a 4th era topic. Don't worry, the other topics will also come, since these are all scripts that I still need to finish. The poll just posted this week was just to determine which one I should finish first according to you guys. But that being said, you guys voted for an unsolved mystery from the 4th era. So today we're talking about the unmentioned wars of Tamriel. So before we begin, be minded that this topic, well, it took a lot of time to research to only get very limited conclusions. I spent hours and hours looking at and listening to dialogue only to find a couple of offhand hints. I encourage every lore master or lore YouTuber or even regular lore consumer to do your own research, and if you find anything like a remark or anything that gives a breakthrough in this little topic, tell me or make your own video. I personally really want to solve this whole mystery, and this video is just the result of my own research. So I hope you'll enjoy it, and with that said, let's kick off with the video. A few months ago, Discord user Grandmaster Joffrey came to me with a piece of Skyrim dialogue I had never thought about before, and it kind of, well, stuck with me. I never really managed to solve the mystery it posed to me until I decided to take a crack at it this week, and I still didn't solve it, but I just found some good speculation. The piece of dialogue I am referring to is the dialogue of the Imperial legate Rikke before you get sent off to retrieve the jagged crown for the Empire. She says the following. I know Gelmar, we fought in many wars together. He is not a sentimental man taken to fancy. If he believes the crown is there, he has likely found it. This sentence at first glance is very uninteresting, until you think about the implications of the part where she says, we fought in many wars together. You see, it's impossible to pinpoint which war she is pointing to when she says many wars. So why is this a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because it could explain the entire outcome of the Great War as it stands. Let me explain. The Great War ended 25 years ago, well, if you take it from the perspective of a Skyrim player. Rikke is about the same age as Gelmar and Ulfric, so somewhere between the age 50 and age 55. So let's take age 55 for good measure. So this means that they were all around, well, 30 years old when the Great War ended in the year 175 of the 4th era. We know that Gelmar and Ulfric left the Legion almost instantly when the White Gold Concordat was signed. So if we take age 16 as the military age for the Imperial Legion, like it was during most of the Roman days, then we can assume that the maximum amount of time that Rikke and Gelmar could have served in the Legion together was in the time span from the year 161 and the 175 of the 4th era. Of course, there's the Great War. One long war from the year 171 and to 175 of the 4th era. But that is one long war. We still have 10 years of time before that in which they apparently fought together and fought together in many wars. And well, we have no historical records on that time period. And yet, according to Rikke, in this period of 14 years time there were many wars. So let me warn you, the things that I am saying in this video from now on are basically all speculation and could very well be untrue. But anyone watching this channel knows by now that I absolutely love overanalyzing small pieces of worthless dialogue. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. So, we know they fought in the Great War together, so that is one. The other known conflict at the time is the Hammerfell Civil War that was going on in the years before the Great War. One could argue that they might have fought in that war together, but the Empire was probably neutral in this conflict, since Hammerfell, as far as we know, was not fighting over whether they wanted to be part of the Empire or not. This was a classic Crowns versus Forebears war, over the governing of Hammerfell. So, to not alienate any of the two factions that might end up on top, the Empire would probably have stayed out of the conflict. But for sake of this video, let's count this war anyway, so then we have two wars, since we have no idea what confirmed armed conflicts there were. So, from this point on, it's all about which definition we will handle for the word war, and which word for the word many, which definition for the word many. The classical definition of war is organized prolonged violence between political entities. In this context, political entities means any group capable of waging war. According to the Correlates of War project, for a conflict to be classified as war, the conflict needs to have an annual average of 1,000 deaths to combat-related injuries. Or combat-related reasons, I mean. This is a pretty modern definition of the term, but it's also been applied on history. So, I will take this definition, 1,000 combat-related deaths annually, on average, as my definition for war. And you might ask, why do we even need a definition for war? It's just fighting, right? Well, because a minor border conflict or a fight against a bandit camp isn't really a war, and you need a definition to define what is a war and what isn't. Okay, so many wars. What does the word many mean in this context? The word many is very tricky since it can, well, vary per perspective. But for example, I could say, there is many people in my room, or there are many people in my room. Then I mean, well, like 10 people. While if I say, many people in my country speak Dutch, then I can mean almost all of the population. So millions of people. So what's our reference point here? Well, if you say many wars in a time where, well, war is going on and the world is in all-out conflict, then 10 wars can mean many wars. While if you say many wars in a time of peace, you could mean 4, maybe 5, maybe even 3 wars. Since Legate Ricca is saying this in the year 201 of the 4th era, the Skyrim Civil War is basically the first major conflict since the Great War, I assume we need to hold on to the low end of the definition. So I speculate that they fought in 4, maybe 5, or maybe even 3 wars, depending on how she defines it. This doesn't really add up, since the only 2 known conflicts at the time are the Great War and the Hammerfell Civil War. But when I asked, well, some people, they argued that the Great War could, well, in itself be seen as multiple wars on its own. But I kinda disagree with that. The Great War were 2 military campaigns in the same conflict. It were 2 of the same parties fighting against each other on 2 fronts, so it's a 2-front war rather than 2 separate wars. So what are these other wars? Well, the honest answer is that we don't know. There is simply no information on it. At this point all we can do is theorize, and that's exactly what I wish to do. So when I got this piece of dialogue from Grandmaster Joffrey, one of his theories was a war with one of the Elsewhere kingdoms, since, well, they are the client states of the Dominion and not part of the Dominion, so war with them would not get you a full-scale war with the Dominion. To be honest, this is a bit optimistic, since the Dominion would probably immediately step in. But to be honest, it's not also that radical of an idea. If you think about it, the only reason these 2 kingdoms are bound to the Dominion is because the Dominion claimed it had brought the moons back. And therefore, all of the Khajiit race is very grateful to them. Whether they really brought the moons back is a topic on its own, but at least they claimed it and the Khajiit believed it. At this point, the Thalmor started a complete propaganda war in Elsewhere, trying to blackmail the Empire, and it worked. After several years, the 2 kingdoms of Elsewhere became the Dominion's client states, so bound to the Dominion in an alliance. However, I have to imagine that the propaganda probably wasn't that effective at the border regions of Elsewhere and was more effective inland. These regions, especially the city of Rimmen, on the Elsewhere-Cyrillic border, have a lot of Imperial influence and their economies are largely driven by the trade with the Empire, because it's just, well, far away from the Dominion. And since Elsewhere isn't a direct part of the Dominion but a client state, this trade probably continued with the Empire, and I can see the Khajiit in the border regions being more pro-Imperial for it, because they have more contact with the Empire and see that, hey, those demonizing propaganda pieces that the Thalmor bring out, they're not at all completely true. While the Khajiit inland, who don't have any contact with the Empire, would fall harder for the propaganda. This could lead to, well, a large-scale border conflict, if the Empire would try to retake the most northern Elsewhere kingdom, if that kingdom is more pro-Imperial. This would also have a part in explaining the large-scale tensions between the Empire and the Dominion at the time of the Great War. I mean, it makes kinda sense, but on the other hand, also it doesn't, because if the Dominion decides to step in, then we would have had the Great War a couple of years earlier. I personally speculate that if, and let's say if, this kind of conflict took place, it would have been around the year 167 of the 4th era. Just before the rise of Titus Mede II to the throne, but still close enough to the Great War to give the Thalmor a reason to keep prolonged high tensions. But do keep in mind that this is all speculation and actually pretty unlikely, since we know that a lot of veteran soldiers and a lot of their accounts say that, well, nobody really saw the war coming. A war on this scale was a complete surprise. If tensions had been this high between the Dominion and the Empire, so close before the Great War, then, well, the people should have been able to see it coming. So another idea that Joffrey pitched to me was that a war with Morrowind over its independence or autonomy in the Empire, that such a war could have taken place there. This, if anything, he and I found both pretty unlikely, since, well, we would have probably heard from it in Skyrim, from one of the Dunmer. But still, it's a possibility. So, what other possibilities do we have? Well, since this is all speculation, I can make a case for another war. Another civil war, to be specific. And to be even more specific, another civil war, but this time in Cyrodiil. Now, I need to be careful here. This is all speculation and I've not found enough evidence at all to justify presenting this as fact. So take what I say with a large grain of salt. I personally think that somewhere before Emperor Titus Mede II came to the throne, that there was a civil war in Cyrodiil, likely around years 162 of the 4th era, so 39 years before Skyrim. The reason I think this is because the Legion in Cyrodiil was especially weakened at the start of the Great War, according to the book The Great War, and we have some NPCs in Skyrim like Horik and Calixto who came from Cyrodiil, and both are of age to have survived the Great War, and one of them even fought in the Great War, and both of their parents died in unknown circumstances before the Great War. This means that if we extrapolate this, adults in Cyrodiil died on, well, quite a large scale a few years before the Great War in some unknown manner. Now, this is quite shaky evidence, and I realize it's quite shaky evidence, but it could be pure coincidence. However, it could, for example, be a plague, but it being a civil war would make much more sense in my opinion. Let me explain. For example, it would explain another war in which Gelmar and Rika fought together, as it's implied that they knew each other before the Great War and that they met Ulfric in the Great War. They were friends before the Great War. It would explain the Empire's military weakness and the weakness of the defenses in Cyrodiil at the time of the Great War. Perhaps this wasn't even a civil war in Cyrodiil, but just a series of border skirmishes and bandit raids and other minor battles that Rika would just describe as wars to a new recruit, even if these are not wars, according to the general definition of war. This is an idea that Pietro Grifindo pitched to me on Discord. But still, a chain of wars like that in Cyrodiil, or battles like that in Cyrodiil, would explain the unexplained deaths around the time, and would explain why the Imperial Legion was already that worn down in Cyrodiil, and at the beginning of the Great War, and why it stood no match initially against the Dominion in the first few years of the war. I recognize that this theory is not perfect at all, but it would solve some of the holes in the knowledge that we have at this moment, about the lead up to the Great War. This is about as far, well, as speculating will get me in this subject, as I'm already, well, in very far-fetched theories. So, I'm stopping here. However, if you have any thoughts on this subject, please put them in the comments, or please contact me on the subject, because I am personally really curious to see, well, how to solve this subject. Truly, it's been one of the most tedious things to research ever since I started this channel, and I listened and read through dialogue for hours, and only to find a couple of single offhand remarks. I would really love to hear your thoughts on it, and perhaps, well, you found something I missed. That said, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, give it a like, subscribe for more Elder Scrolls content, check my channel out for, well, a lot of Elder Scrolls lore content. Hit the bell icon if you want to be notified of more of my videos. And if you want to support me in a more personal way, there's of course my Patreon. You got your name at the end of every video and you get some exclusive Patreon content. And if you want personal contact with me, then my Discord and Instagram are in the description. On Instagram I'm currently doing my 50 days of lore, which means that I'm uploading an image with some lore information every day for 50 days. So check out my Instagram if you want more lore content than just videos. And with that said, Imperial Knowledge signing off.